All right. Good morning. It's 4:30 in the morning. Well, it's 5 o'clock now. Got in here at 4:30 and I dropped a pen under my desk. I couldn't reach it because I'm too fat, so I grabbed a broom to pull it out, and there was a pile of dog hair in front of the broom, and I thought, man, I got to sweep this office out. So I spent the next 30 minutes sweeping the office out. So I'm running behind. How about some Bigfoot stories? All right, here we go. This first encounter is from a person with the handle Mama Bear. She wrote me a really super nice email before she got to her story, and I enjoyed reading it. She's a very avid Bigfoot knower. She calls herself a knower, not a believer. She even has a sign on her front porch. She says, "For all who enter to see." It's a Bigfoot crossing sign. It's the yellow and black one, with a caption that reads, "I don't need anyone else to believe in what I already know." Again, then she goes on for several paragraphs and lays out her case on why she thinks Bigfoot is absolutely real and why others should believe in Bigfoot. She's a bit of a Bigfoot evangelist, and I'm not that way. I'm not here to try to convince you that Bigfoot exists. I'm not here to offer evidence. That's not the mission of this channel. The mission of this channel is to share stories. And she sent me a story, and I want to share that with you. So here we go. My parents were antique dealers when I was growing up. My mother was raised in Hanging Dog, Georgia, and my father was raised on the streets of Los Angeles. I need to tell you a bit more about my father. He had a rough upbringing and wasn't raised to be timid or nice. He was kicked from foster home to foster home as a kid. His mother was an irresponsible alcoholic. He was a Golden Gloves boxer. Needless to say, he didn't fear anything that I ever knew of. My mother and her family, being from the South, were very outdoorsy. All of my uncles were either loggers or forest industry people. My dad, my mom, and I were constantly camping and fishing. I grew up hunting and fishing the woods of Oregon and were quite familiar with all of God's creatures therein. It was Saturday, sometime in June or July 1973, and it was 3:30 to 5 a.m. Dad and I had packed the Dodge Tradesman with many banana boxes of collectibles and antiques to take to Medford, Oregon, to the flea market. We did flea markets quite frequently, as there was no such thing as the internet or eBay or Etsy back then. For you youngins out there listening, imagine that. I don't think Mom was feeling well, so she didn't come with us on this trip. It was just me and my dad. Drinking our black coffee straight up, it was my job to pour the burning hot liquid while jostling around the van at 55 miles an hour. We were heading south on I-5. The night was clear and cool at the elevation that we were at. We were somewhere between Grants Pass and Medford. I-5 was deserted, and we were the only vehicle for a long period of time. In the distance, Dad and I spotted a large figure standing on the northbound side of the interstate. Back then, there were only 2 lanes each way, and it's still that way today. "What's that, Dad?" I asked, pointing ahead at the dimly lit, illuminated, dark, hulking figure ahead of us. Dad leaned forward against the steering wheel a bit and hit the foot pedal to turn the headlights on to bright. The bright and dim mechanism kids used to be on the floorboard. What was brightly illuminated that morning, in that very instant, on that dark, lonely stretch of mountain interstate, changed me and my father forever. We watched in amazement and stupid awe as this creature, first stepped over, on 2 legs, stepped over the freaking guardrail and right into reality. It then stood and looked right at us, turning its upper torso to do so. Now let me say that until you actually see one, it is difficult to explain the feeling that it gives you. It's like everything you ever thought you knew was simply a lie. All told, the event was about 10 to 15 seconds of life-changing revelation. But that was long enough. We guessed that the creature stood around 8 to 9 feet tall. It had black hair or fur, head to toe. It had really long arms, and it had a massive body build. Massive is a word I use because I can't think of anything else that fits the bill. Couldn't really get a good look at the face. Goosebumps, I still get them remembering looking at this thing. Dad and I were both stunned for a second. We were still driving. We never stopped. Dad wasn't talking. What was that? I asked shortly after passing by it. After hesitating as if trying to choose his words carefully, Dad briefly turned his head and looked at me and said, I don't know what that was, but I can tell you that it wasn't a bear. Turn around and go get another look at that thing, I blurted out. No way, he said. I thought for the first time in my life I heard what must have been fear in his voice. We kept on driving to our destination, talking about what we had both witnessed that morning. Our eventual conclusion was that it was either the biggest man in a hairy suit early in the morning alongside a deserted mountain we had ever seen, with the ability to easily step over a guardrail, or it was a Bigfoot. We gave ourselves an out with the big man hairy suit scenario, but really we knew what it was, even though at first we may not have wanted to admit it. When you see one, your gut just knows. All you folks out there who have seen one know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you? You just know. It doesn't take much evidence to change what you know. What my father and I saw by chance that early morning in 1973 made us both knowers. We still continued to fish and camp until my father passed away in 2001. We weren't afraid to go out into the woods, but we often talked about the day we saw Bigfoot. His last words to me were, I'm going to miss my fishing partner. I still cry all of these years later. My dad was my best friend, and I was his tomboy daughter. Thank you for listening to my story. I have enjoyed writing it. And then she goes on to say a few other things which are important. I think people who actually lay eyes on these creatures, she's right. It affects them. I don't really know. I've never seen one, so I don't know how to put it in words. I've seen some spectacular things in my life, but nothing like this. So I don't know how this affects, but I can imagine. And so she's a knower, and she knows that these things exist. And I'm guessing she's only had one encounter because that's all she talked about here. But she knows what they are. And Mama Bear, you're so sweet to send this to me. And I really appreciate you taking the time to write it. And I'm glad that you enjoyed writing it. Okay, let's go to the next story. Okay, this second story, she doesn't really tell me that I can use her name or not, so I'm just not. So we're going to keep her name anonymous. But this story has some interesting facts for the people who listen to this channel looking for behavior patterns and, you know, research stuff, things like that. This story actually has some pretty cool stuff in it. It's kind of long. It's not action-packed, but it's kind of scary, and I think you're going to find it very interesting. She writes, this is about a somewhat recent account of events that Jay, my boyfriend, and I had on Highway 21 in Washington. It took place the second week of September of 2017. I'm not claiming that everything or anything that happened to us is Bigfoot related, but I'm saying that it was the weirdest night I have ever spent in the forest. I have, however, heard others claim that some of these things also happened to them with their encounters. So here it is. We were taking a vacation from Boise to the Oregon coast. It just so happened that the gorge was closed because of forest fires, and we had to take a different scenic route down Highway 21. I was so excited because we were going to be driving right through an area of forest that is very lush and beautiful. Also, I'm a huge Bigfoot enthusiast, and that forest has many Bigfoot sightings documented on the BFRO Google map. So Jay and I agreed we could camp out that first night, which getting him to agree was quite a feat as he hasn't tent camped in over 20 years. We both, however, have spent a lot of time in the woods over the years, hunting and fishing, backpacking, camping, and so on. We left Boise really early the morning of September 9th, 2017, and made it to Prosser to a couple of wineries I love, and up the road heading west to Clear Lake Recreation Area. Getting to a campground just off Teton Road, I believe, right before dark. We drove through the campground that's not too far off the highway. We found it very odd that there was only one other camper in the whole campground, as it was getting late. However, the previous campers had left the tags on the post, which made it look like somebody had reserved each spot. This campground was dirt, not paved. It did have 2 outhouses, but it was fairly rustic. The one RV that was there looked like one of the small rental camper vans, and the 2 people only had their lawn chairs sitting beside the van. I believe they had just stopped to make dinner and weren't going to stay. We drove all the way to the very back of the campground, very close to the river. It was more like a creek. I think it's called Cold Creek, that runs along in between the reservoir and lake, I think. This campground is just a few miles east of Dog Lake and Leech Lake on Highway 21 in Washington State, if you want to look it up. It was just before dark when we got to the back of the camp and chose our spot. We walked around down by the creek through some downfall timber on a little trail just to see what things looked like around us a bit before we set up for the night. We had just gotten the tent set up and bed made up when we heard an odd scream, and then a pack of coyotes went off following suit, and they were very close. I would say just down the creek embankment, maybe a couple of 100 feet or so from us, and then they quieted down for a few seconds, and then another odd scream, and the coyote sounded off again. We both looked at each other, questioning what that weird noise was before the coyotes. This instantly worried me because I had my little dachshund with me. She was disabled and elderly at the time. Unfortunately, she passed away the day before Christmas of 2017. However, that was the last we heard of the coyotes. Zoe, my dog who normally pretends to be quite ferocious, was having nothing to do with any of it and was already snuggling into the bed. We all got settled in for the night. It had been a really long day. I would say it was around 9 p.m. Sometime later, I asked Jay about the popping that I was hearing. I've been in the forest a lot, and I know that as the temperature drops or as the wind picks up, you'll hear trees popping, but this seemed out of the ordinary. It was very strange, quite loud, and so frequent it almost sounded like popcorn popping, and it was very strange. It was getting cold, but there was not even the slightest breeze. Interesting to say the least. Sometime later, I was trying to fall asleep. I was kind of in and out of sleep when we started hearing hooting noises, like owls sound, and they did sound very much like owls. If they were owls, they were perched directly above us in the big trees because it was very loud and seemed to go on for hours. It seemed odd, though, that we did not hear them fly in and land or fly away. And I'm pretty sure we would have heard them because everything seemed dead quiet. It was so quiet the absence of noise seemed loud in your ears, if you know what I mean. Hey, I want to interject here. You know, owls can fly so silently. I've had owls light on a tree limb in the tree where a deer stand is, not 15 feet from me. So that may not be a big deal. They just don't make a lot of noise. They're real stealthy birds of prey. Drifting in and out of sleep, I don't know exactly what time of night it was. Jay and I and Zoe, my dog, all needed to get up to relieve ourselves. We didn't end up walking to the restroom because it was extremely dark and we didn't have a working flashlight. We ended up walking a few feet from the tent and doing our business. It was quite nerve-wracking for me because I was so afraid my little dog would get attacked by the coyotes. You never know when they're going to be around. I was talking to her, trying to coax her to go, and 20 feet away from me, Jay was relieving himself. Not to be graphic or funny, but when a guy goes out in the dirt of a well-worn campground, it's kind of loud. Am I right? Needless to say, there was no mistaking that the guy was going to pee out in the woods, and it was loud. When all three of us were set to get back in the tent, Jay got in first, and I held Zoe up so he could wipe her paws with a towel. I didn't want her getting dirt in the bedding. She was sleeping under part of the covers because it was pretty cold outside. Just as he was wiping her paws, and I kid you not, directly behind me, I heard the same sound of something urinating about 10 or 15 feet behind me. This was every bit as loud as I had just heard when Jay was going to the bathroom. Instantly, all of the hair on my body raised up and a shiver went down my spine. I instantly got that electrical shock feeling of when your adrenaline fires. It freaked me out so bad, I shoved my way through the tent door as fast as I could, saying, zip it up now." The whole time whispering, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" He said he didn't hear it, and I don't know why, because I heard it as clear as day. Maybe from the commotion of me barging my way in and yelling in fear. I don't know about you. I'm not an animal biologist, but I don't know of any wild animal that would come up in the middle of the night to within 10 feet away from two people and a dog and urinate. If they were going to get that close, you're probably going to get eaten or charged and trampled, and not necessarily in that order. I will say again, we did not have a working flashlight. We had brought a rechargeable one, but for whatever reason, it did not charge correctly. This was very unsettling, but Jay did have a handgun of some time. Actually, several guns. He just rolls that way. So I did feel better knowing that we were covered in that department, but it took me a while to settle down. We were just dozing off again sometime later, and I heard a large branch break. I don't know if it was one on the ground or in a tree, and it was just the one time. Dozing off again, Jay woke me to hear the tail end of a vocal of something howling out what sounded like the word "mom." It sounded like a long drawn-out moan/howl. It started with kind of like the letter M sound, and it ended with an M sound. And then it did it again a second time, which I heard from the beginning to end because I was wide awake at that point. It was deep and loud. It wasn't very far away. I would say maybe a few hundred feet, not much more than that. I do know that sound doesn't carry very far in that dense of a forest. I can tell you it sounded almost identical to the Ohio howl, with the exception that it wasn't quite as long in duration. It was very frightening. I've never heard anything like that before. I don't know all the sounds that every animal can make, but it definitely freaked both of us out. I know it's pretty easy to ignore one strange thing, but with so many weird things that happen throughout the night, it's hard to explain. I have spent lots and lots of nights out in the woods, but I've never had a crazy night like that before. I can't explain everything that happened to us, and I know people are going to think I had a Bigfoot on the brain, and I did, but that was the whole purpose of why we decided to camp out. We could have stayed in a hotel, but I really wanted to have an opportunity, give it a very slim chance, like a needle in a haystack, of having any kind of Bigfoot-related experience. I know people will form opinions, but all I can say is that I think I have had an encounter. I'm quite skeptical, and I don't take everything for granted or believe everything I hear in others' stories to be true. I'm not the type of person that thinks everything that happens to myself or other people is Bigfoot related. But I do know what happened to us was very out of the ordinary, and I do believe thousands of people have encounters. Can I prove this is one of those encounters? No, I can't. The next morning we did look around some, and I could not find a branch anywhere on the ground within the distance of where I thought the sound of the branch breaking came from. We didn't identify any specific footprints either. The ground was a scattering of pea-sized gravel, some fluffy ash like dirt, and pine needles. The van we noticed the night before was not there in the morning, so it did appear that we spent the night all alone in the campground. My encounter is not super exciting. I just thought it was very interesting and it might add credibility to someone else's experience. Also, I would love to hear if anyone knows of any animal in the Northwest that would come up to two people and a dog standing around in the middle of the night and mark their territory. Feel free to share my story if you like. I have a couple more I may share with you as I have time. Thank you for your time. I love your stories, and thanks for having the platform for all of us. That is this is a real interesting email to me, and I think it probably was an encounter. And again, I think these Bigfoot are just curious. I think they come into people's camps. They don't show themselves. Maybe they just do things to annoy you, keep you up all night, and keep themselves entertained. Two things I said, made a comment about the owls, and I think that's true. I've even had red-tailed hawks come in, and I never hear a thing. I think that's what makes them so stealthy. The coyote thing and small dogs, you better believe coyotes, even here in Mississippi. My little dog Hank, I have to watch him when we go out at night because he can be 20 feet from me and 2 or 3 coyotes could come in and get him. I've heard of that happening. I've heard them that close to me, and you did good keeping your dog close to you with all those coyotes around. I don't know what they're trying to do when they do that. Probably eliminate competition. Maybe they're just looking for an easy meal, but it happens. But the urinating on the ground, and I know what you mean about that splash you hear when a man stands up. I think a lot of that is because the distance that the water falls to the ground makes it sound loud. I mean, it just hits the ground loud. And when a puddle forms, it even just gets louder. But there is no mistaking that sound, and you heard it right behind you. If it was a Bigfoot, what was he doing? I don't think he was marking his territory. I think he's just mimicking things that you do. I think he's just having fun, but that's just my opinion, and I'm no expert. Anyway, I'll quit running my mouth, but I really love this story. I think it's fascinating. To the woman who sent it in, I appreciate it so much, and I know people who listen to this will get a lot out of it and will enjoy your good writing. So great job. Thank you. This last story is from Kelly. Kelly lives in Metairie, Louisiana. Kelly, y'all are going to love this story. This is so good. He writes, my name is Kelly. I'm a 50-year-old dad of 2 teenagers. I own and operate an auto repair shop. I've been in business in Metairie, Louisiana for 25 years. I was in the Navy Reserve for 8 years. I'm not a good writer, as you will see. I wrote back to Kelly and I told him, Kelly, you're a good writer. You did just fine with this, and I love this story. I want to tell you on the front end. This is a short story of what happened to me in the fall of 2014. I had recently gotten interested in motorcycles. One of my mechanics owned a bike. He would let me ride it, and I found out immediately that I really liked feeling the freedom and complete independence of riding a motorcycle. So I began to look for a bike. I ended up with a used Kawasaki Vulcan 800. It's not a hog, but it's plenty good enough for me. My wife didn't like it, but so be it. After Hurricane Katrina, my parents, who lived in New Orleans all their lives, moved to Albany, Louisiana, a small town 75 miles or so from New Orleans. Metairie, where I live, is only 10 minutes from New Orleans. One weekend, I decided to ride the bike to their house in Albany. I was not used to the traffic on the Interstate 10 and 55, the 2 highways that I had to take to get to their house. People do not care that you are on a bike, believe me. I made it safely to their house in Albany, and upon arriving, I hit the front brake and slid in the gravel driveway, and I tumbled onto their carport. My mother was worried at first, but started laughing so hard she had to go inside. My dad was already laughing. I wasn't hurt, I was just embarrassed. My wife and kids were coming up in the car, so they didn't see it either, thank God. I'm telling you this because it is why I decided to take another route home. It was much more safe than taking the expressway home for a less experienced rider. My dad, my mother, my wife, and both kids agreed. We ate dinner and we visited for a while, and around 10 p.m. I left on my way home to Metairie. The alternate route is Highway 51, which runs right through Mariposa Swamp Wildlife Management Area. I think I pronounced that right. It's a 2-lane highway that runs parallel to the interstate, which is raised above the swamp. I was about 6 miles into my ride on Highway 51, and I needed to pull over and relieve my bladder. So I pulled over, I shut off the bike, and I walked a little bit off the side of the highway. It was pitch black, no streetlights at all. I could hear the interstate above me, but other than that, I was all alone on this dark highway. I walked to the side of the road, and I could smell what I thought was dead fish. This is common in the swamp where people catch fish, and they clean them right there and leave the guts and the heads where they lay. I was relieving myself and looking into total blackness. I could make out a few trees, but nothing else. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I was looking at a huge cypress tree just a few paces away off in the water, until it moved. The wind was not blowing. This thing moved under its own power. I have to say, instead of number 1, that I almost went number 2 real quick. It began to move towards the road and was only 20 feet from me. It was at least 9 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It was not a man. I had never seen anything like this. The strange thing was that it made a fart noise as it passed me and a loud, awful grunt. I really think this thing was doing its business, and I pulled up on it to do mine. The smell as it farted and ran within 2 steps across the road into the swamp was nauseating. I could feel the concrete under my feet shake as it hit the road to run away. The noise it made was as if it was straining or irritated. From what I could see through the moonlight was an outline of a head on top of a long-haired body. That's about it. It scared me so bad that I never rode that way again on my bike. I didn't tell a soul until now after I found your channel. I plan on telling my wife and kids, so share this if you want along with my name. P.S. I know this sounds crazy to have a story about Bigfoot farting, but that's exactly what happened. I also recently found out that they called this creature the Rougarou that lives in the swamp. I think I pronounced that right too. And I know people in Louisiana have a name for these things. But Kelly, I know that event scared you to death. And I know it's not funny. And you know why I'm laughing. Because it's just a funny story. I mean, you walked up on a Bigfoot taking a crap. That's just funny. And he didn't hurt you and everybody's okay. And so that's the great news on the story. But I really enjoyed reading that. I just laughed and laughed when I got the email and read it. And I emailed him back. I told him he wrote a great story. He's a good writer. And if he has any more, to send them in. Okay, I think that's going to do it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching to the end. That's important to me. I guess I'll see you guys on the next one. Really appreciate you. Talk to you soon. Bye.